When faced with life most unimaginable, many of us would hope to wake up from this horrible nightmare. But for some people, reality pushed them to the brink, and somehow, they came out alive. This is not about scenes from a movie, but terrifying real-life experiences of 10 individuals who fought death in ways that looked impossible. Tighten your seatbelt, cause you might lose it, as we unveil the 10 survivors of the unimaginable. Number 10. Aron Ralston. Imagine planning a hike in one of the most stunning remote regions of Utah's canyon country all alone. This was Aron Ralston's aim as he set out for what should have been a routine day on April 26, 2023. But he didn't know that this day would push him to the final limit of human endurance and transform his life forever. Aron was born in Marion, Ohio in 1975. When his family moved to Denver, Colorado at the age of 12, he found himself surrounded by the Rocky Mountains. Talking about love at first sight, he attended college at Carnegie Mellon University in Pennsylvania while working as a raft guide over the summers, and double majored in mechanical engineering. Ralston worked as a mechanical engineer for the technology company Intel in Arizona, Washington, and New Mexico for 5 years. Eventually, in 2002, his passion for climbing led him to quit his job as an engineer to spend more time on the mountain. Aron had big dreams. He wanted to climb all 59 of Colorado's 14,000-foot peaks all alone in the winter. Maybe it's safe to say that Aron was just full of ambition. He was determined, and a bit stubborn too. Everything was rosy and more of a dream come true for Aron until something tragic turned his life around. On April 26, 2003, the 27-year-old Aron decided to take on Blue John Canyon, a remote slot canyon in Utah. Feeling fulfilled, he didn't bother telling anyone where he was going. After all, what could happen? Well, as it turns out, a lot happened. While scrambling down into a section of the canyon approximately 3 feet wide and 10 feet deep, an 800-pound boulder wedged between the canyon walls decided to join Aron on his adventure. The boulder dislodged and fell onto Ralston's right forearm, pinning it against the wall. Now the problem was, the boulder had decided to stay there as long as he was there. He spent the better part of 6 days trapped in the sandstone canyon, slowly working his way through his remaining water and food, intended only for a one-day outing. He tried every possible means to free himself. From pulling to pushing, name it. But that boulder wasn't bothered. With his water supply running low, Aron had to turn to a natural hydration source that wasn't refreshing. His situation was critical, and he knew it. He even recorded a series of messages for his family and friends, facing the reality that he might not come out alive. On the 4th day, Aron made his last-ditch attempts to amputate his arm, but came up short, as he realized he needed to break the bones before attempting to cut through the arm. At that moment, the only cutting tool available was a cheap pocket knife attached to a multi-tool, which could not cut through bone. He resigned himself to death, videotaping goodbye messages for his family and scrawling his name, birthday, and presumed date of death into the canyon wall. On the morning of the 6th day, Aron realized that his arm had begun to decompose and managed to break both his radius and ulna by wrenching the arm against the boulder. With the bones broken, he successfully amputated his arm using the knife, with camelback tubing functioning as a tourniquet. The whole process was torturing, but Aron wasn't going to let a little thing like pain get in his way. Following his self-amputation, Aron scrambled out of the slot, rigged an anchor, and rappelled 65 feet down and hiked miles with one arm and barely any strength left. Just when it seemed like the universe had given up on him, it sent a family of hikers his way. They quickly alerted the authorities. However, rescuers were already searching for Aron at this point and had confined their search to the region around Canyonlands, so a helicopter was luckily already nearby for extraction. Rescuers reached Aron approximately 4 hours after he cut off his arm. By the time he arrived at the hospital, Aron had lost 25% of his total blood volume and over 40 pounds. Authorities later recovered the severed arm from under the boulder, which had to be hoisted out of the canyon using a hydraulic winch. Following his rescue, Aron became a media celebrity and gained fame through his book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and later in the movie, 1:27 hours. These days, he's a motivational speaker, sharing his experience with audiences worldwide. Number 9. Julian Kupke. Have you ever thought of how it would feel to fall off the sky only to find yourself in the middle of a jungle, or let's say Amazon rainforest? This might sound like a horrible nightmare, but for Julian Kupke, it was all happening in real life. At just 17 years old, she had a shocking experience that changed her entire life, with a story that began with a weird childhood. Born to German parents, 1954, Julian was raised in the Peruvian jungle from which she now had to escape. Her father, Hans Wilhelm Kupke, was a renowned zoologist, and her mother, Maria Kupke, was a scientist who studied tropical birds. Together, they set up a biological research station called Panguana so they could immerse themselves in the lush rainforest's ecosystem. Julian became a self-described jungle child as she grew up on the station. While most kids played in the backyard, Julian was seen in the dense Amazon jungle, filled with several creatures. Well, this early exposure to wildlife proved to be a crucial factor in what would come next. It all started on December 24, 1971, when Julian and her mom boarded Lanza Flight 508 from Lima to Pucallpa. This supposed flight was meant to be short and fun, but fate had other plans. Placed in the second row from the back, Julian took the window seat while her mother sat in the middle seat eating their sandwiches and enjoying every moment. But 15 minutes before they were supposed to land, the sky suddenly grew black. Daylight turns to night, and lightning flashes from all directions. Could this be the end of the world? Immediately, turbulence shook the aircraft violently, and then, without further warning, lightning struck the plane. She described people's screams and the noise of the motor until all she could hear was the wind in her ears. The plane began to disintegrate in mid-air. Julian Kupke and the seat she was strapped into became detached from the crumbling plane itself. She said, "I was no longer inside the cabin. I was outside, in the open air. I hadn't left the plane. The plane had left me." The next thing she knew, she was falling 10,000 feet through the air and into the canopy. When Julian finally found herself on the ground, she was alive, with a broken collarbone, a deep wound in her arm, and one shoe. And let's say it was a miracle, but her story of astonishing perseverance wasn't over yet. At this exact point, Julian's childhood in the jungle paid off. After an unsuccessful series of searches for her mother, she embarked on a journey of self-survival. Feeling helpless and hopeless, she remembered her father's advice to follow water downstream, as that was where civilization would be. At this point, Julian knew that in the Amazon, the only means of survival was to find water. The nights were filled with scary scenes of the jungle, yet Julian pressed on. On her 9th day trekking in the forest like a scene out of a movie, Julian came across a hut and decided to rest in it, where she recalled thinking that she'd probably die out there alone in the jungle. But then, she heard voices. They belonged to 3 Peruvian loggers who lived in the hut. Julian said, "The first man I saw seemed like an angel. Although the men didn't feel the same way, they were slightly frightened by her, and at first thought she could be a water spirit they believed is called Yemanjabut. Still, they let her stay there for another night, and the following day, they took her by boat to a local hospital located in a small nearby town. After 11 harrowing days alone in the jungle, Justian was saved. After she was treated for her injuries, Julian was reunited with her father. It was then that she learned her mother had also survived the initial fall, but died soon afterward due to her injuries. Julian went on to help authorities locate the plane, and over the course of a few days, they were able to find and identify the corpses. Of the 92 people aboard, Julian Kupke was the sole survivor. Julian's story is a combination of sheer luck and remarkable resilience. Number 8. Ricky McGee. The Australian outback is a vast, remote, and rarely populated area that covers more than 70% of the Australian continent. As a home to a diverse set of animal species, now imagine yourself in such an environment. This was the case of Ricky McGee, a blend of survival, misfortune, and a dash of humor. In January 2006, a 35-year-old Ricky McGee set off for a job in Port Hedland, Western Australia, but the day had other plans for him. Originally from Queensland, Ricky wasn't an adventure lover or someone who wanted to test his limit against the wilderness. He was a regular city boy, driving through the Northern Territory on his way to a new job. Ricky was minding his own business, driving to see a friend before he resumes work, when things took a tragic turn. According to Ricky, he decided to pick up some hitchhikers along the way who claimed they ran out of fuel. At this point, offering a hand of help was a decision that might not have been his brightest move. During the journey, one of the hitchhikers offered him a drink. About 20 minutes later, he started feeling dizzy, and that was the last thing he remembered. Shockingly, he woke up half buried in the middle of nowhere, with no idea of how he got there. Was he drugged, robbed, or abducted by aliens? He really had no idea. Now, almost everyone would have a meltdown at this point, knowing fully well the Outback isn't known for its hospitality. It's more of a welcome to the middle of nowhere, now try to stay kind of place. But Ricky wasn't going to let even the environment let him down. He was ready to fight to the very end. With nothing but his wits and broken lighter, Ricky was ready to make the Outback his temporary home. At this point, Ricky quickly remembered the first rule of surviving an Outback: get rid of a balanced diet. He feasted on frogs, leeches, grasshoppers, and whatever he could lay his hands on just to survive. Surprisingly, days turned into weeks, and Ricky's situation went from bad to worse. One could say he is a man of many talents, including the fact that he had to keep himself sane despite being lost for 71 days. Yes, you heard that right. 71 days in the Outback. Finally, just like a dream come true, after more than 2 months of isolation, Ricky was discovered by a group of station workers who probably thought they had just encountered a ghost. Looking emaciated, Ricky was rescued to safety. He had lost a lot of weight, dropping from 230 pounds to 105 pounds. After his rescue, Ricky's story became the talk of the town. His life experience made him write a book titled Left for Dead in the Outback, sharing his incredible story of survival and how he ended up there. While the Outback tried to take his life, Ricky Magee walked away with his life and a tale most of us can only picture. Number 7. Anna Elizabeth Johansson Bogenholm. Anna wasn't looking out to make headlines or have a medical miracle when she went skiing, but let's just say, life has its own plan. It was on the evening of 20th May, 1999, when Anna Bogenholm and 2 of her colleagues set out to ski in the mountains outside Narvik, Norway. At the time, the 29-year-old was studying to be an orthopedic surgeon. An expert skier, Anna and her colleagues Marie Falkenberg and Torvind Neisheim took a steep mountainside route. She had taken this route several times before, but on this day, nature was very unpredictable. On the way down, in a twist of fate, she lost control of her skis and fell headfast on an 8-inch layer of ice. Below the ice was a frozen stream. When Anna fell, the ice, which appeared solid, decided to show its mischievous side as it cracked open under her weight, sending her into the freezing water below. Talk about a bad day already. When her friends found her, only her feet and skis were above the ice. They grabbed her skis and tried to pull her out, but she was tightly held by rocks and ice below. They called for help, but the situation wasn't promising as Anna's head and torso was slowly freezing under the frigid ice. Now being trapped under a sheet of ice is a kind of scene that happens in horror movies, not in reality. But luckily, while under the water, she found a pocket of air and struggled to stay conscious while help arrived. After staying under the freezing water for 40 minutes, Anna stopped moving and her body became limp. Hypothermia set in, her heart slowed down, and eventually, her body temperature got to an astonishing 13.7 degrees Celsius, which was the lowest ever recorded in a human who survived. Most of us would have given up at this point, but Anna's body had other plans. Finally, rescuers from the bottom of the mountain arrived with a pointed gardening shovel. They were able to dig the tough ice and pull Anna out of the cold water at 1940. She had been under freezing water for 80 minutes. By all accounts, everyone believed she was clinically dead. No pulse, no sign of life, just a stiff, lifeless body. If there was a good time to give up, this should have been the perfect time. But this is where things got complicated. Instead of zipping her up in a body bag, the medical team tried to give it just one last shot. The medical team took action, using every skill they could remember to warm Anna up. Slowly, Her body began to respond, and her heart, which had taken a very important break, began to respond. And then, to everyone's greatest surprise, Anna is back to life. However, it took her more than a year to move, because some nerves had been damaged during her ordeal. Anna's story became an inspiring research into hypothermia and how the human body can survive severe conditions. It's a reminder that even when it seems impossible, it's worth giving it one more try. Number 6. Nando Parado. In this unpredictable story of life that reads like a novel, no one knows what the next moment brings. Nobody expected that a simple flight across the Andes would become the most jaw-dropping story of survival ever told. In 1972, Nando Parado was a 22-year-old college student who devoted much of his free time to playing rugby. When his team, the Old Christians of Montevideo, Uruguay, were given the opportunity to travel to Santiago, Chile, for a match, he excitedly invited his mother and sister to come along. Little did he know that the trip would turn into the most trying experience of his life. On October 13th, the chartered plane in which the group was traveling failed to clear a mountain peak. The last thing Parado remembered was looking out the window and seeing the mountain just below the plane. Then noise and darkness, and a blow to the head left him unconscious for several days. When he came to reality, the true horror dawned. The aircraft had broken in two and crash-landed in a treacherous mountain bordering the area between Argentina and Chile. It was as if the universe hit the pause button on reality. Many of the flight's 45 passengers had died on impact, or shortly thereafter, including Parado's mother and sister. Their deaths piled another trauma on top of what was already a terrible calamity. Once the initial shock wore off, then began the challenge of trying to survive in some of the worst possible conditions on Earth, stuck at an altitude of approximately 8,000 feet, with no vegetation or wildlife, and bitter temperatures of 20 degrees below zero. In such a harsh environment, Parado had to start thinking quickly about his own survival. The loss of his family members renewed his determination to get out alive and return home for the sake of his father. He would not let the mountain break him. Parado recalls those early days on the mountain with a hint of pride, knowing that everyone had pulled off a remarkable feat, in spite of the incredible odds against them. With limited supply and no form of rescue, Nando and the other survivors were faced with an unimaginable decision: either eat the body of the deceased friends to stay alive or die. After 2 months of waiting in pain, Nando and 2 other survivors, Roberto Canessa and Antonio Vicentin, decided to venture into the mountains to find help. If no one was coming for them, the only option was for them to go looking for help, and that's exactly what they did. They trekked for 10 days, battling with the elements and their weaknesses. Their journey was filled with danger, moments of despair and determination. At one point, Nando noted, "I was so tired that I thought of asking a snowman for directions." Finally, while searching for firewood to spend the night alongside a river, Nando and Canessa spotted a man on horseback across the water and waved madly for help. The river's current was so loud that they couldn't hear each other, so they tied a knot around a rock and tossed it to the other side. The shepherd got the message and brought back rescuers the following day. 2 days later, emergency helicopters made their way to the accident site and picked up the remaining members of the group. There were 16 survivors in all, and they would be home in time for Christmas. Today, Nando is not just a survivor, he is a symbol of home and determination. Subscriber's pick. In a small town lived a child who radiated joy wherever he went. His infectious laughter and unbreakable spirit tells it all. All of a sudden, life decided to have its fair share. A fire broke out in the home, leaving this child a terrible scar that would last for his entire life. The flames had left their mark on his skin, a constant reminder of that night. But despite the physical scars, his happiness remained untouched. He wore his burns like a badge of survival, a testament to the strength he never knew he had. But what would you do if you find yourself in a life or death situation with everything stacked against you? Leave your answer in the comment section. Number 5. Poon Lim. Poon Lim never imagined he would become, but how could he prepare for what he faced? Sounds unpredictable, right? That was Poon Lim's exact feeling when he found himself in such a situation. Poon Lim was born in China in 1918. He grew up in a fishing village and learned to swim at a young age. When he was just 10 years old, his family moved to Malaysia, where he continued to work in the fishing industry. So let's say he had this swimming skill from a tender age. In 1942, at 30, Poon Lim was drafted into the Chinese Merchant Marine to work as a steward on the SS Ben Lomond, a British ship transporting supplies from Southeast Asia to Australia. Surprisingly, the unexpected happened on November 23, 1942. The Ben Lomond was gently making its way through the Atlantic when a German U-boat decided to spoil the day. In a twinkle of an eye, the ship was on its way to the ocean floor. Lim, who never wanted to join the ship, grabbed a life jacket and leaped overboard. As the ship disappeared underneath the waves, Lim found himself in the middle of nowhere, with no friends or family around except the hungry shark. Luckily for him, even though it wasn't a thing of luck at the moment, he found a wooden life raft nearby. Lim was about to test just how far human creativity could stretch. He had to create a canopy from the raft's material to protect himself from the sun, and collected rainwater using his life jacket. Talk about creativity. Fishing became important as he crafted hooks from metals and used whatever he could find as bait. It wasn't easy for Lim as he fought for survival, battling seasickness, extreme temperatures, and several threats of sharks. He even had to catch seabirds that landed on his raft, using their blood to quench his thirst. Lim's ordeal lasted for 133 days. His resilience was put to test over and over again, but he endured, finding his way to survive in the harshest of conditions. Like a dream come true, on April 5, 1943, Lim was rescued by Brazilian fishermen. His story immediately gained international attention as he became a symbol of survival against all odds. This inspired him to publish a survival manual titled Survival in the Open Sea, sharing his life experience with others. Number 4. Zaid. You know how life sometimes gives you what you didn't see coming? That was exactly what happened to Zaid at just 2.5 years old. It was more like a situation bigger than his age. It was a cool evening at home when a candle accidentally ignited his bedding. It was a horrible moment that led to serious burns covering 80% of his little body. Doctors were ready to pack him up, thinking he wouldn't make it. But little Zaid wasn't ready for that yet. He underwent several surgeries, but guess what? Zaid came out of the hospital alive. He had to adapt to life's significant challenges, including losing both of his hands, his eyesight, a toe on his right foot, and all the toes on his left foot. Growing up, Zaid faced some tough times, as he was often found as a target of stares and gossip. Imagine being a child and hearing someone say, "You look like a zombie." That's enough reason to question one's existence. But Zaid's mom stood by him, encouraging him to embrace who he is. Today, he had channeled his experience into something positive. His life had become a beacon of hope for others facing life's challenges. Number 3. Tommy Oldham Ashcraft. In the vast blue waters of the Pacific Ocean, Tommy Oldham Ashcraft and Richard Sharp embarked on a sailing adventure together in September 1983. The couple were delivering a luxury boat called Hazana from Tahiti's Papeete Harbor to San Diego, which seemed like a routine trip, or so they thought. 3 weeks into their journey, Mother Nature had other plans as they enjoyed their time in the open sea. A tragedy struck in the form of Hurricane Raymond. Tommy, a 23-year-old lady, and her fiancé Richard were certainly no strangers to the sea. Richard, in particular, was a strong sailor and was the one hired to deliver Hazana to its end destination in San Diego. With Tammy by his side, life was perfect. A journey into the unknown that held only joy and love. For the first 2 weeks, the journey was peaceful. The gentle waves and calming vastness of the Pacific proved to be a quiet getaway for the pair. However, on October 12th, the peaceful calmness was interrupted by a Category 4 storm named Raymond. The waves, at 40 feet, engulfed the boat, causing Richard to send Tammy below deck. The waves became so violent, and the winds turned so forceful that the yacht capsized. Mere moments before this, Tammy heard her fiancé yelling. The brutal gales knocked Tammy off her feet, causing her to fall back and sustain a serious head wound. The bloody injury rendered her unconscious for almost 30 hours. When she finally woke up, she was alone. Tammy had to not only deal with finding a way to land, of which there was none in sight, just endless water, but also deal with the very real prospect that her partner had died. Isolated with nothing but a ruined boat keeping her afloat, Tammy had to consider her next moves. She had few options, but knew one thing: she would fight to stay alive. The bleeding cut to her head needed medical treatment, but she was nowhere near land and seemingly had no means of getting back on land. For 41 days, the ocean became her entire world. A world that offered no form of comfort, only endless water. Yet Tammy refused to give in. She pushed through, determined to reach safety. After more than a month adrift, she spotted land on the horizon: Hilo, Hawaii. It was the first solid ground she'd seen in weeks, and it signaled the end of her ordeal. Number 2. Victoria Cilliers. Till Death Do Us Apart takes on a whole darker meaning in the life of Victoria Cilliers. On the Easter Sunday of 2015, what started like a normal routine to Victoria ended up as a day filled with betrayal and almost the loss of her life. Known to be an expert skydiver, Victoria went parachuting in Wiltshire, England, under the impression that her husband had planned it to mend their already broken marriage. But as she fell down a dizzying height of 4,000 feet, Victoria realized that something was wrong because she tried repeatedly to have her parachute open, but it remained futile. Victoria said she wasn't overly concerned, but when her reserved parachute failed, she realized something was seriously wrong. Going at 60 miles per hour, one would think that that would be the tragic end of her life. But lo and behold, Victoria miraculously survived despite life-threatening injuries. This happened because she landed on a soft, newly plowed field. But while Victoria was convinced that she had experienced nothing more than a tragic accident, the company behind the skydive immediately suspected foul play. Soon after a very intense investigation, they found out that Victoria's husband, Emil Cilliers, was responsible. Following the attempted murder, Victoria, who struggled to accept that her husband was capable of killing her, remembered that a week prior her husband had tried to gas her. She had then jokingly texted him, asking if he was trying to kill her. It was later revealed that the reason behind his need to kill his wife was due to the fact that he owed some substantial debt and wanted to obtain his wife's life insurance. After a long trial, Emily Cilliers was convicted of attempted murder in May 2018 and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years. Number 1. Hugh Glass. It all started when Glass encountered a grizzly bear with her cubs while searching for the Ashley Food Company expedition near present-day Lemon. The bear left him with a broken leg, a ripped scalp, a punctured throat, and numerous bruises. Who would have survived this? Believing he was dead, the expedition leaders ordered John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger to stay with him until he drew his last breath. But these two had something else in mind that didn't involve babysitting a dead man. The two men, convinced that Glass was a goner, decided to handle the situation on their own. They put him in a shallow grave and took away his gun, knife, and fire-making kit. After all, what does a dead man need them for? Little did they know Glass was far from dead. He was only getting ready for his journey of survival. Glass, with a will to live, regained his breath and realized he had been abandoned. Then slowly he walked as he made his way toward Fort Kiowa, which was 200 miles away. Along the way, he ate whatever he could lay his hands on: berries, insects, name it. You'd think he'd give up, but every painful inch he moved was driven by a singular thought: revenge. Glass was determined to find the men who left him for dead and give them a piece of his mind, if not his fist. Weeks later, when he finally stumbled into Fort Kiowa, looking more like a zombie than a man, the first thing he did was ask where his friends were. And when he found them, well, let's just say they were more than a little surprised to see Hugh Glass, very much alive and very much not in the mood to forgive and forget. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.